but I'm truly blessed that we have this time with Nick. Every time I spend a day with Nick, I laugh, I learn something new, and hopefully we can add some value to the conversation today. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Nick.
Yeah, cool. I remember I'm just a winemaker. I'm not very technically savvy, although I'm getting this thing down as we go through. I'm also not in sales, although I think I spend most of my time right now doing sales. But today's been a hell of a day. We're actually, I don't know if you know, this time of the year is really critical for new plantations. So right now, today, two of my vineyards, I've got guys ripping out. On one vineyard, I've got people ripping out old vines because of eutypa. Which is the big dead arm disease that we have here in California. I'm putting in new plants, and at another vineyard, I'm getting retrellised. So we were up this morning at 6 o'clock in the vineyards trying to figure out how to get some of the stuff happen. So that's what's going on right now in the vineyards. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you. I've got some videos to roll through. I think I've only got 40 minutes or something. Is that right, Ben?
Yeah, I think we blocked anywhere between 30 and 45 minutes.
Okay, let's see if I'll see if I can get it done with it. I'm going to also shrink everybody off to the side because I'm going to record this and then I'll send the link back to you guys on YouTube. And when I do that, I have to move you guys off so that if you want to contact me, you'll just have to give me a chat, or at various points I'll unplug myself because I'm going to plug myself in because it gives a better sound recording. So good to see your pretty face, Jakob. All right, mate. I'm going to go ahead now and start on this. So we're going to be talking about Trig Point Chardonnay. And I think most of you guys know who I am, but I had a really fortuitous meeting with Sorting Table many years ago, and they were the first people to sort of give me a break as I left the corporate world and went out on my own. And so I'll go through why we chose the name as such, and then I'm going to go through Chardonnay. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on Chardonnay, mainly around the mass selection versus clone. I'm not going to go too much into pruning today because we're on limited time, and then a little bit about malolactic and its misconceptions. And then I'm going to discuss the Merlot and Cabernet, which come from the Diamond Dust Vineyard. And hopefully, if we get time, we'll talk a little bit about the Zinfandel, which comes from another vineyard that we own up in Geyserville called Railyard. So just basically what a trig is, this is what a trig looks like. This is actually a photo of the nearest trig to my parents' house. My parents lived down towards the ocean there. And my brother and I used to carry wood up to the top of these hills and build these damn things when we were kids. And what a trig is a point of reference or a site. And that's sort of how that relates to what we see as premiumization of Cabernet and Chardonnay and Zinfandel in the Alexander Valley. So it's a site, it's a look back, but it's a point of reference. And just to scare you guys a little bit, if you can't remember what these words mean, tangent, sectant, you guys remember all this stuff, of course. I was a science major. I don't know what you guys were doing, but this is the sort of thing that we deal with every day. I'll speak a little bit slower because my microphone might be a bit wobbly. Okay. Just real basic stuff for you guys. Just if you, like for instance, if you're trying to work out the distance across a river, you find a point of reference on the other side, such as that green dot would be like a tree. You come across the other side, you put a point there, and then you hard measure that red line, which would be 400 feet or 400 meters. Sorry, we're all talking metric. If you take a theodolite, which you'll see a photo of in a minute, you can work out what the degree is. So we put in there like 31 degrees. So you can actually work out what the distance is across the river, because you know the tangent of 31 degrees is about 0.6. And so it's about, if it's 400 meters, I'm going to leave you this, you can go through it yourself, but it's quite easy to work out how far or how wide that river is just by having 2 points of reference. It's quite a cool thing. That's why trigonometry is so interesting. So this is my father in 1958. He was the 4th expedition to the South Pole. This is Mount Egg. Oh my goodness, what's the big Mount Erebus? This is Mount Erebus. If you recall, that's where the massive plane accident was from New Zealand. Everybody was killed, unfortunately, on it. But this is my father building trigs in the South Pole on the Beardmore Glacier, because of course there's no wood down there, but that was him back in 1958. There was 8 guys went down to the South Pole. Unfortunately, 3 of them were killed on that trip too. So in 1959, when he was there, they took dogs because the dogs went down the crevasse first rather than the snowcats. This is my father in 1959, and there he is today in 2018. So this is a theodolite, and we spent all our Christmas and school holidays obviously working with my father and being chainmen, as they called it back then. Jumping into the vineyards, right? So this is that blue dot. If you can see the blue dot there, this is where I'm sitting right now. I'm in the town of Healdsburg. This is my house out here in Dry Creek, and we're looking at the Diamond Dust Vineyard, and I'll make that clear in a minute. But if you head up Healdsburg Avenue, that's Simi Winery where I used to work, and you turn right and you go down Passalaqua Road. You come down Passalaqua Road and you end up in this massive valley. I've only taken a small shot of that valley, but it was originally all Passalaqua, but the Mazzonis, the Sagacios, and everybody else, of course, married into the family, and you'll see a little sign of it in a minute. But this here is the Cabernet Sauvignon. This, I don't know why it doesn't show up, but this is the Merlot here and here. The Chardonnay is here, and then the Zinfandel comes from another vineyard in Geyserville. The interesting thing
Nick,
is,
can you hear me okay?
on this side of the ditch, you're in the Russian River, and on this side, you're in the Alexander Valley. So that's why this property is really unique. So the Cabernet and the Merlot are in Alexander Valley, and the Chardonnay is in the Russian River. Pretty cool. Heading north, up Healdsburg Avenue, jump back on 101, and you head up to a little town called Geyserville. Some of you may have heard of that. And you pull off at, well, I find it easier to pull off at Canyon Road. And this is the Zinfandel vineyard right here. So the whole property is this, goes down to the Russian River here. But the Zinfandel is this piece up here. Beautiful, beautiful vineyard, which we'll talk about if we have time. So Diamond Dust is also, sorry. So the volume, I'm going to come off, Ben's asking me to come off microphone, so let's try it. Let me know if you can hear that, Ben. So the Diamond Dust is basically what they call a paper road. So when they were developing many new cities around the world at the time, they would designate areas for roads. And this road was never built, and that's why they call it a paper road. It's still designated. The land is still set aside for the road, but the road was never built. Ben, can you nod if you can hear me? All right. The rail, and then Railyard is built, it's named for 2 reasons. Firstly, we have railway lines that run through the back of the property. And then we also, it's the name of a very famous rugby stadium. And it was pretty funny. I went to try and find a photo of the old stadium, rugby stadium in Wellington, but they imploded it, and it's called the Cake Tin, and they basically wiped it off all social media. It's pretty funny. I can't even find an old photo of it. I can find rugby games played there, but not photos of the stadium. Yeah, Ben?
No, I didn't know the rugby stadium story. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
I love it.
Well, you know, in New Zealand, the All Blacks, they were the #1 team in the world, but we unfortunately lost the World Cup last year. To the Poms. These are the labels you've seen. We call this signpost on the Chardonnay because we wanted to separate it from, even though it's on the same property as you saw, we just wanted to separate it from the Diamond Dust Bordeaux side of the vineyard. And then, as I said, the Zinfandel comes from the Railyard. This is a picture of the Cabernet. You can see it's on the Piedmont part of the slope. I don't like vineyards up in this area because they're much thinner soils. This is the Merlot here. I don't know why. So follow my, it's this block here is the Merlot. I'm not sure why that doesn't show up on the overhead. In this block here.
Nick, can you, sorry, Nick, to interrupt.
Yeah.
The PowerPoint is 2 seconds behind you. So when you make that, when you're pointing to the Merlot, it hadn't switched yet. So could you just, yep.
Yeah, sorry, using a microphone, not using a microphone delays. So this is the Merlot block right here. This is the Chardonnay block here, and the Cabernet block is up here. And this is the reason
Nick,
why.
Sorry, Nick. And then just below to the bottom left-hand corner of the Chardonnay is where the Russian River sits, right?
Correct. The Russian River is right here, over on the side.
Right now we're seeing signpost.
Okay. Everything's a bit delayed for you guys.
Got it.
So this is the signpost. It used to have Sagacio, 3 signs that said Pasalacqua, but they've all changed they've taken their names off the tree and put on the numbers now, because it's a very, well, you know what the Italians are like. There's maybe a little bit of inbreeding there or whatever. And so they wanted to defend the innocent by taking the names off the post. I wish I'd taken a photo earlier on when the post was fully lined up. But anyway, that's where the name comes from for signpost. The key things for Chardonnay is mass selection. We don't really have, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the cane pruning, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about malolactic when it comes to the winery. But basically, these are mass selections rather than clones. And I know that may be difficult for some people to understand, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. Ben, this is a clearer photo for you. This actually shows the Russian River flowing by the Chardonnay. So this is the Chardonnay block, very old vineyard that you can see there's some dead vines in here now, but that's the Russian River right there. If you were to drive from here to there, it would take you about 40 minutes, because you've actually got to drive all the way back into Healdsburg and come back on the other side. So the evolution of plant material in California really started in 1920. The Italians came to California, of course, and started planting things like, not necessarily Zinfandel, but Zinfandel and Mourvedre and Carignan and all these other varieties were interplanted, because that's the way they used to do it. They were basically field blends. In 1933, of course, after Prohibition, we started having varietals being labeled on bottles. And I still have a bottle of 1934 Cabernet from Simi, but you guys will probably remember Engelnock and BV, etc. They started making varietal wines in the 30s as well. In 1960, we started, most wineries by 1960 were really putting varietals on the labels. And then in 1970 through 1988, I'm calling it, there was a massive evolution in naming of these plants that we were growing. And so we're specifically talking about Chardonnay, and I'll come off screen in a minute and describe that what means. In 1988, 89 though, we started having phylloxera, and so the rootstock that we were using became incompatible with what we were planting. So the differences with mass selections are that we have smaller berries, we have smaller yields, we have looser clusters, but more importantly, we have these thick skins. And that for us is quite important because it gives us more flavor, more skin to pulp ratio is quite different. And clones were basically selected for larger yields and for accumulating sugar. And sorry, I'll jump back. Stop sharing for a second. So I'm going to try and do this without drawing. Normally well, actually, I have a little drawing here. This is one I did yesterday. So let's see if this works for you guys. So what happened was in the 1970s, 80s, we didn't have nurseries. Like, you couldn't go to it. Today, when you want to buy a plant, you just go to the nursery and buy a plant, right? Well, we could not do that back in the 70s and 80s. We had to propagate our own plants. I used to, my second degree is in horticulture, biodynamics and organics, and I would actually take buds of apples and put them on the pear tree. I'd put oranges on the nectarine tree, and my mum would go, "What the hell is going on?" I mean, I know you guys are all watching television because you're American, but that's what I did for fun. I don't know what everyone else is doing in a lockdown, but that's what I was doing. So what happened was, we would plant a vineyard, and it was quite easy. We just get AXR1 rootstock, and we'd have this little, if you can imagine this plant, just this little stick in the ground, and we could take a knife and we'd make a little T, and we'd peel back the cambium layer, or the bark. We peel back the bark and we expose the cambium layer. We'd then take a stick, so we would have a 3-bud stick that we would collect in the winter, and in the spring we'd bring it out. We get our knife and we chip the bud out. It's called chip budding, of course. So we take the chip out, we peel back the bark on the rootstock, we slip the bud and we tape it up, and we can grow Chardonnay. Very easy to do. So in the 70s, winemakers started going into the vineyard and saying, "Hey, you know what, this vine, this vine, this vine, this vine, they taste different to all the other vines. So we're only going to take the budwood from those vines." And let's say they selected for melon. So then they could go into the vineyard again and they'd select the 4 or 5 most melon vines, and that became melon squared. And they could re-select for this stuff. And we had names for all these characteristics. So you can imagine if we had warm fruit to cool fruit, high in warm fruit would be like pineapple, melon, stone fruit, pip fruit, citrus grassy, right, whatever. And we had names, Spring Mountain, Rude, Seed, Wenty, Mount Eden, Bato, Calera. I mean, we had names for all these things. This is what a mass selection was. 1988-89, phylloxera came along and destroyed the AXR1 rootstock because, of course, the French had told us a bullshit story, as usual. Never trust Frenchmen. So, well, you know how the French salute, right? Anyway, so, well, you know how the Australians salute. So many flies in Australia. Anyway, so the scientists said, look, we can solve this problem because with this new rootstock, because we thought this rootstock was Vitis labrasca. It wasn't. Somebody had taken Vitis labrasca and blended in some Vitis vinifera. Vitis vinifera is Cab, Chard, Merlot, everything that you know. Vitis labrasca comes from the east coast of the US or from China. Funny that, Chinese virus, right? So the Labrasca, once we started using Labrasca, Blandurian rupestris, which is all Labrasca, and we put these mass selections on top, virus started to show up. We've got leaf roll, leaf curl, stem pitting, corky bark, and all these other diseases, and often the vines died. And so when we went back to look in the vineyard, the scientists said, look, we can solve this. There's 2 ways to solve this. And this is where cloning came about. They went in the vineyard and they found one vine that for some reason didn't show any virus, and that became clone 1. The other way to do it was you take a leaf, and this is how I got into it, but it's called meristem tissue culture. You take a leaf, you put it on the agar plate, you slit the veins, you grow the vine, you take the tip, you grow the vine, you take the tip, you grow the vine, and you're outgrowing the virus. You put it on the new rootstock, voila, clone 2. And this is why Chardonnay is bullshit. Chardonnay is boring. All the Chardonnays taste the same today because by removing the virus, we removed all the flavor. Oh, this is Dijon 75, this is Dijon 96. Bullshit, it's all the same. It all comes from one plant. How diverse is that? Dijon clones, UC Davis clones, and Espargette clones are the 3, Espargette of the Italian. They're all from the same mother. This is why we like inbreeding. This is why the Italians were so good at this shit. Anyway, a little sidetrack. So the Singing Tree Chardonnay is made of the C selection. So it's more, so clones, this is why today, when you drink Chardonnay, people talk about stone fruit, and pip fruit. Yeah, because they're all the same. So by having some of these old mass selections, it still makes us interesting, California wines, California Chardonnay interesting, if you can find these old vineyards. And that's what this is. This Singing Tree Chardonnay is an old vineyard. I mean, and you'll see a picture in a minute of what I'm talking about. Does that make sense?
Signpost. Signpost.
Sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
Chardonnay or Singing Tree. Singing Tree or Signpost?
Sorry, what are we talking about? That's why the Signpost Chardonnay is so unique. Sorry, Singing Tree is in my head because of the birds this morning. Anyway, I have this tree outside my house, and these birds, they find it as, and it's 6 o'clock in the morning. It's impossible to sleep. So all night I got frogs and coyotes, because the coyotes are after the damn frogs. And in the morning I got the birds. It's like a plague.
Hey, Nick, I did have a question, though. In your presentation, you mentioned mass selection.
Yeah.
And in some of my reading, I've seen masal selection. Are we saying the same thing, or is
Correct.
that the same definition?
Masal is the Spanish word for mass. And there's another really interesting one. So masal, mass, and field are all the same thing. And there's a fourth one that you may or may not have heard of. Outside of California, we talk about the Mendoza clone, which is really funny. Firstly, there was no Chardonnay in Mendoza when this thing was created. And secondly, it's not a clone. It's a mass selection or field selection. So when you're talking to somebody from down under, New Zealand or Australia, they talk about the Mendoza clone. It's the same thing. It's a mass selection, field selection, or masal.
This is fantastic. Does anybody else on the call have any questions? You want to open it up to them very quickly, Nick?
Any questions on Chardonnay? Okay. One other thing I really want to explain, because I want to, while I've got you, I just want to explain things that piss winemakers off, because I'm a winemaker. So the other thing that pisses winemakers off is when someone says, hey, dude, how much malolactic is in your wine? Unless you understand the science, don't ask the question, because it's very funny, because it's like yield. How many tons per acre on your vineyard? I look at the guy and I'm like, if I tell him 2, he's probably going to go, oh man, it must be really good. No, you can undercrop a vineyard as easily as you can overcrop a vineyard. Yield versus quality is a bell-shaped curve. It depends on the soil. So does the bell look like this? Or does it look like that? So you don't know. So when someone says how much yield, well, how many plants per vine, we talk about kilos per plant, not tons per acre. But I don't know. No wonder you guys lost, the British and Americans got together and lost that satellite at Mars. Remember that? And the British called the Americans up and said, I thought you said left-hand thread. The Americans went, I thought you were talking metric. They're the last 2 imperialistic nations in the world, and they can't even agree on the same size of a gallon. An English gallon is 4.54. What the hell is an American gallon of 3.73? I don't know. Anyway, pontificating. All right, so how to piss off a winemaker about malolactic? Look, I was obviously upset. Let me jump back on the microphone. So if you want to know how much ml is in the wine, you guys know it's malic acid to lactic acid. And this is a bacteria fermentation. It's not yeast. Okay, this is bacteria. This is not jack-in-a-box bacteria. This is bacteria that you can eat. Okay? If you're in a cool climate, you have 4 grams of malic, gives you 2 grams of lactic. You know when Ben says, I want you to sell 100 cases of Chardonnay, Signpost, you're going to go, oh, 100 cases will do because Ben's not very threatening. It's a half reaction. If you're in a warm climate, you end up with 2 grams of malic, gives you 1 gram of lactic. Okay, which one is more buttery? Well, this one, of course, the cool climate. So the first thing you want to ask a winemaker is, before you ask the ML question is, are you in a warm climate or are you in a cool climate? Because the cool climate will give you more butter. Second thing you want to know, when did you add the bacteria? If you add the bacteria during primary fermentation, you get less butter because the yeast eat nitrogen. All right, they're eating nitrogen to stay healthy. If you put bacteria in there for the ML, the bacteria eat the nitrogen quicker than the yeast. The yeast are now looking for food. When they see the diacetyl, I'm not going to draw the diacetyl element, but it has a ON element off the end of the benzene ring, and the yeast can eat the diacetyl as an energy source. And so if you add the bacteria during primary fermentation, you get less butter. If you add the bacteria after fermentation, you get more butter. It also depends on the temperature of the ferment. If you ferment hot, less butter. If you leave the wine on lees, everyone talks about this bullshit bantonnage and surly and aging, all that crap. If you do all that, you lower the butter character again. If you want to maintain the butter character, you rack off, pull the lees out, and put the wine back in the barrel. Okay? So before you ask the ML question, find out, is it cool climate or warm climate? When did you add the bacteria? What temperature was the ferment? Did you leave the wine on lees? These are all more important than asking about whether it's buttery or not. And there's another trick. If you want to increase the butter, I can add citric acid and malic acid and keep the bacteria going and create even more butteriness. So again, very confusing. So don't ask, really, unless you know the science about how much ML is in your wine. My quick answer to this, though, for your information, is it's about 20 to 30% in our wine, but I add the bacteria during fermentation. And the reason why I don't really know what the percentage is because I let the ML run until January, February, and then I add the SO2, I rack off, and I go back into whatever vessel I'm in. So I let it run for a little while. I don't want it to get too broad. Any questions at all on that? Did I lose anyone?
Totally lost me, Nick. Totally lost me on that one.
I'm so sorry, Ben. I will speak slower for you.
I'm kidding. Essentially, what you're saying is, malolactic is taking the softer, like dairy type acids and turning it into citric acid, or is it vice versa?
No. So in a grape, there's two main acids, tartaric acid and malic acid. There's a lot of other acids like succinic and all these other acids as well. But tartaric and malic, when you press the Chardonnay, those are the two main acids. In a cool climate, your total acidity could be 10 grams per liter. Of that, 4 grams of that 10 could be malic and 6 could be tartaric. This is not an exact science because I've sometimes seen the malics higher than the tartaric, etc. When you add the bacteria, you convert the malic acid to lactic acid, and lactic acid is a softer acid than the malic. You often heard the saying, an apple is like malic acid, which is correct, and butter is like lactic acid, which is also correct. So those two statements are true, but the lactic acid is a softer acid. It's like with sugar too. People don't understand in a fermentation, you start with glucose. The two main sugars are glucose and fructose. And this is the problem right now with these guys, and I'm not picking on Napa Valley specifically, but when you drink Cabernet of 15, 16, 17 alcohol, the yeast die, the Saccharomyces die, and because the alcohol becomes too high and they've consumed the easy sugar, which is glucose. And so you end up with fructose at the end. A small amount of fructose tastes much sweeter than a small amount of glucose. And so when you drink 16 alcohol Cabernet, 17 alcohol Zinfandel, this is exactly what people talk about, the Coca-Cola. What the hell, are you drinking Coke? That was a Pepsi. I saw that. Your timing was fantastic, and I recorded that, so that's brilliant. Unreal. Okay, so the thing is, am I that boring? You have to stay awake by drinking Coke? What do you call an Aussie with a sheep under this arm and a sheep under this arm? Menage a trois.
Dear Lord. Okay, Nick, let's move it forward here.
Moving forward. All right, let's jump back. Let's jump back on to where I was before I was rudely interrupted. So basically, clones are selected for yields and for gathering sugar quickly. So this is why mass selections are more interesting for us.
Picking Chardonnay out here in the Russian River today. The guys are sorting through it. Beautiful, beautiful old vineyard. We're just wrapping up here, and should get this fruit into the vineyard at the winery in the next hour or so. It'll be fantastic. This is some of the best Chardonnay that we make, and you can see we've got big berries and small berries going in the same cluster.
Nick, are you there? Can we hear you? Okay, there you go. All right.
Beautiful, beautiful fruit.
I can hear you. The presentation came off the screen.
Subtropical characters.
Here's the video.
Fantastic. No clones here, no clones.
Sorry, Ben, could you hear the video?
I could not hear the video.
Oh, damn it. Okay.
Amy, you could hear the video? Yes, Amy could hear the video. Okay, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, so that was just showing you in that cluster, you can see big berries and small berries in that same cluster, and that's what the virus gives you. It gives you this randomness, which makes it more interesting. So jumping into Merlot now, again, the most important thing for me is the old mass selection. By the way, that Chardonnay vineyard was planted in the 70s, and that's, I mean, we talk about old vine Zinfandel, sometimes we talk about old vine Cabernet, we don't talk about old vine Chardonnay, but I hope you understand that old vine Chardonnay is important as well. The other key thing for me in a vineyard with Merlot is to make sure that the water holding capacity is high, because a Merlot berry weighs 1.2 grams versus a Cabernet berry that weighs about 0.9 grams. If you dehydrate a Merlot berry 10%, you can imagine all you're doing is concentrating sugar, acid, and tannin, and that's not very interesting. I want the berry to remain whole, so when I bring it into the winery, I can extract the hell out of it. And that's why the Diamond Dust Merlot is more of a Cabernet drinker's Merlot.
Yep.
Good afternoon on a very warm day out here in the Alexander Valley. I normally try to get out to look at vineyards in the mornings, but I was too busy sampling this morning, so I didn't get out here. This is Trig Point Merlot, old vine, very limited irrigation that we have here, and we're looking at the Merlot vine, and up there on the hill is the Trig Point Cabernet Diamond Dust, and beyond my car over there by the river is actually where the Chardonnay comes from. But we're looking at Merlot. We're going to be picking this tomorrow. What's unique about this vineyard is the sandy loam soil that we have here. Beautiful, easy for the water to maintain the vines, so it has good water holding capacity. It's organically farmed. You can see we have a lot of weeds as usual, and the vineyard itself is relatively old, so these vines are in very good balance. We don't have to do too much crop removal here during the season, and the flavors here, I just tasted some sort of black plum, black peach, blueberry, just really full on, and I'm really excited about bringing this into the winery tomorrow. Anyway, Trig Point Merlot, looking good, beautiful vineyard.
Yeah, one of the things that I didn't explain in the vineyard is so old that it was planted with the original trellis system, which is basically a 4-wire trellis, and that's why it seems to be a little bit looser than what you typically see in a more modern planting. Jumping into Cabernet, the key thing for me I mentioned was earlier harvest. I want to make sure, I don't want to draw the graphs, I can send that to you later, but basically in Bordeaux we talk about 100 days from bloom to harvest. In Napa Valley we're around about 130 days from bloom to harvest, and in Alexander Valley we're about 140 days from bloom to harvest, because Alexander Valley is cooler than the Napa Valley. We get our cool coastal influence comes from the ocean, whereas in Napa Valley, the cool comes from the San Francisco Bay. And the way that happens in the Napa Valley, when the sun comes up, it shines at Mount St. Helena and it draws the cool air up the valley. So it doesn't occur until later in the day. In the Alexander Valley, when you wake up, we actually have the fog already there because it's come in during the evening. Cane pruning is important to me because it spreads the buds out further away. You can jump on my YouTube site for Trig Point, and you can see a couple of videos up there that I post showing the differences between cane pruning and spur pruning. Cane pruning is a little bit harder. It takes longer at winter, but we do less hand work in the vineyard during the season. With spur pruning, it's much faster to prune. Even idiots can do it, but you have to spend a lot more time doing work during the season when we have less people. The other thing I do with Cabernet is I talk about the stability of the wine, because I don't like sediment or deposit occurring in the bottle, and I'll talk about that in a second. So this is a drone video of the vineyard, and you can see this piece of the vineyard is completely different to this piece. This area produces very big canopy and very low crop. So when we talk about tons per acre, this is out of balance in some respects. So we have to be very careful, and this was the hardest piece for me to learn as a young winemaker. This piece here is what we call the powerful piece. This is where the vines and the crop are in really ideal balance. And then this piece here is where, again, the vines are a little bit out of balance. The canopy is smaller than what the crop is. So we actually have to do some crop removal here. This is a very sad drone video for me because that's my car, which was written off by my youngest daughter about 3 weeks ago. So please take sympathy on me and sell some Diamond Dust Cabernet to help me out to pay for her bloody insurance. Anyway, that's a look at the vineyard. As far as winemaking, I said that we generally pick between 125, 145 days after bloom. What happens is the tannins, it's hard to do this without drawing a chart, but I don't want to spend too much time. But the tannins move from green tannins to dusty tannins to dry tannins to ripe tannins. And that's why we as winemakers have to go into the vineyard and constantly taste. What I didn't understand about that piece of vineyard that you saw on the left-hand side, the big vigorous vines, is I would go out there and it would go green tannins, dusty, dry, 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 raisin. I missed it. And that's because those vines are so powerful. When they change from taking moisture from the soil, when the moisture runs out in the soil, because there's such a big canopy, they start drawing moisture from the cluster. And so I had to be much more on it. And so I started picking the dense part of the vineyard earlier, so at 125 days, because there the tannins are in higher concentration than the fruit. In the elegant vineyard, which was the last piece of the vineyard that you saw, I picked later at 145 days because I know it's always going to be more fruity than tannic. So that, for me, makes the elegant wines. We destem, we don't add any acid. We stay on skins for 3 weeks because I'm looking for stability of tannins, and that's why we use the elegant, powerful, dense winemaking. So we'll jump into that.
Good morning. Actually, it's the afternoon. What am I talking about? Out here checking on Trig Point Cabernet. We're getting very close to harvest. We can see that the leaves are sort of lightening up a little bit. Don't know if I want to walk all the way back up the steep hill, which I've just done. But nice, loose clusters. Looking good. Nice and even ripening. We are irrigating a little bit here today because this vineyard is on a very steep hill, and you'll notice that the time is 2 o'clock and the shadow is directly over the vine, which is really, really cool, which is exactly what we want, because at this time of the year, it's this is the hottest part of the day, whereas on August 15 at 3 p.m. it's in the same condition. So that's what I look for. But beautiful vineyard, nice and old, planted in 1990, and this is where we make Trig Point Cabernet from. Phenomenal wine, nice small berry, highly intense, awesome, awesome. Love working here. G'day, Nick Goldschmidt here. I'm sitting here with 3 glasses of wine, and everything we do is single vineyard, and the way we get complexity out of a single vineyard is by choosing blocks and styles, or working the wines to the way the vines best exemplify themselves. So when I was young, I walked into a room once at a pretty well-known winery with 200 wines on the table. I'm wondering, how am I going to blend 200 wines? I came from New Zealand, I didn't know anything about Cabernet, and so working with a consultant, we figured out the best way to do this is to put them into families. Elegant wines, which are the soft berry fruit wines right up on front of the tongue, the powerful wines which provide the fleshiness and the richness, and the dense wines which give us structure and power. So when we go ahead and line all those wines up, I sorted all the elegant wines together, and I chose the best elegant wines and made a blend. I got the best powerful wines and made a blend, the best dense wines and made a blend. We had 3 wines, all from the same vineyard, all from maybe in the same block or not the same block, but all from the same vineyard. And then we made a blend of these 3 wines, and it was the most complex wine that we could possibly make. So today I continue that process. With elegant wines, we can extract them a little bit more aggressively because we know that the tannins are at a lower concentration than the fruit, so we can extract more tannin. Whereas on a dense wine, if we made wine like that, they become too dry and too tannic, so we lower the extraction and try and make the wines more fruit forward. So if I was to drink an elegant wine, I'm going to get more red cherry, great structure, very forward in the mouth, very, very elegant, very ripe, but good acidity, red fruit, and very forward in the mouth. The powerful wine, I can immediately get it. It's more black cherry, a little bit of walnut, and the mouth is really rich, really full, powerful. Not a lot going on in the front of the mouth, not a lot going on in the structural part of the mouth either. And then the dense wines, much more chocolate, a lot more black cherry, but all finished, very supple tannins, good structure, good acidity. And so when we put the 3 together, hopefully, and it's never 30-30-30, because in a warm vintage, I probably want a little bit more of the dense component, whereas in a cool vintage, I want more of the elegant component. So it really depends on the vintage. And when I put all 3 together, we get the most complex wine we possibly can from the same vineyard. And that's how we make single vineyard wines really complex. G'day, Nick Goldschmidt here, winemaker for Trig Point Zinfandel. I am squinting into the sun. Whoa, check that out. And I'm standing out here in Railyard Zinfandel land. Down the end there, we have 2 railway lines. And Railyard is also the name of a rugby stadium that was imploded in New Zealand a few years back. And it's quite fortuitous because right now we've got the World Cup of Rugby going on. Anyway, let's check out some Zinfandel here. We come in here, this is probably one of the best sets I've ever seen for Zin. Big, even, not too much raisening, although the cluster next door has a bit of raisening. Hope you can see that, so we'll check out. Just put a couple of berries in my mouth. I just spat the pulp out. Now I'm chewing the skin. Lots of good tannin, lots of good flavor. And then spat again. You can see how purple it was, and that indicates to me that we're very close to harvest. In fact, we've got this down to pick in about 5 days. Anyway, awesome. Trig Point Zinfandel out here in Railyard in the Alexander Valley.
Okay, so the key things about Zinfandel, again, a mass selection. We actually don't know where the selection came from, but it used to go into Sagacio's property. It's east facing, which is morning sun, good water. We don't have a lot of raisening because we typically pick it a little bit early, and I certainly use way more gentle extraction than I would on Cabernet. So just to wrap up, so currently the Chardonnay is 2017. What the hell, guys? Come on, man. Get this thing going. The 18 is, it's in bottle. We're ready to go. So I'm just giving you a bit of shit because Ben's obviously not getting through to you guys. The Zinfandel and Cabernet were in the 17 vintage, and we made some magnums. We made some magnums as well. So the 2016 is in mag. So 16 is a little bit more, I mean, you guys know how good a 16 was. So 16 is a little bit brighter, a little bit more elegant. 17 and 18 are richer vintages. And the Merlot is currently the 2018. The wines are 100% VVVVV, vintage, variety, vineyard, and vegan. So they're all single vineyard. They're all single varietal, and we don't make any additions. This is a real story, real people, real place. And we really, you know, if you've ever got any customer that wants to come up and see us when we can virtually, instead of virtual, we would love to see you, and we'd love to see you guys as well. I've been working on this vineyard since 1990 actually, but working, making this particular wine since 92. I will mention that, you know how wines move from, I'll talk about it in a second. We've got room to grow these 4 SKUs because we're not utilizing the whole vineyard yet. And of course, I'd love to do these sort of meetings for anyone that you've got any sort of off-premise clients. And when the restaurants go back to business, I love doing these staff trainings as well. And obviously, I would prefer to have more time, but Ben's going to cut me off here. So those are my contacts. You can get me on Facebook and Instagram. There's a Facebook Trig Point page as well. And please feel free. This is my email address. Contact me at any time. And that's my cell phone number as well. I just want to...
Nick.
Sorry?
Sorry, Nick. Just a quick question before you close. Will the video and presentation be available for the team to share, or how do you feel about the IP?
I've recorded this. I will come off recording in a second, and I'll put it on YouTube, and I'll send you the link that you can pass around. I just want to finish that. You know how wines move from purple to red to brown to orange, especially at Southern's warehouse. At Young's warehouse, we sell wines that go from purple to red. We don't keep wines that are brown and orange. So we don't make wines. You will never see crusty shit on Nick Goldschmidt's Trig Point wines, because crusty stuff, this is polymeric pigment. This is unstable tannin. So an anthocyanin, which is 3 benzene rings and a couple of hydroxyl ions, that thing is an anthocyanin. This is purple. When you provide heat, light, air, and time, this is a tannin. This is red. You provide more heat, light, air, and time, that compound gets bigger and bigger and drops out. That's crusty stuff. Unless it's the year you were born, the year you were married, the year of your birth of your first child, the year you got divorced, whatever the hell a significant situation is in your life, if it's not one of those years and it's got crusty shit on, give it away. Because that's flavor falling out. That's tannin falling out. And when Kim Jong-un drops a nuclear bomb on California, and you guys all come to my bunker, do not bring wines with crusty shit. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I really appreciate you guys coming on. I'm going to come off recording now. And if you got any questions, I'll stick around for the next 10, 15 minutes. But thank you.